The year is 2005. After the critical success of SMT3 Nocturne, Atlus director Katsura Hoshino established himself as one of the lead creatives within the company, with the well-received Digital Devil Saga duology, as well as the innovative DS title Trauma Center Under the Knife. However, despite making some incredible and well-received games over the last few years, the company was struggling financially. They laid off 10% of their staff that year due to plummeting profits and missed sales targets. Their parent company at the time, Takara, wasn't doing too well either. I would assume that around this time, Hoshino was working on a new title, Persona 3. Leading the visual design was up-and-coming artist Shigenori Soejima, and on sound was Shoji Meguro. During development, Hoshino was informed that the title could very well be the last they ever make due to the company's financial situation. It's debatable if the good but not great sales numbers Persona 3 achieved actually saved the company. Many point to the Index acquisition later that year as the ultimate reason why. My opinion on this was that it was probably a bit of both. I don't think it's a coincidence that the acquisition happened months after the success of Persona 3. Regardless, there's little debate as to what impact Persona 3 had on Atlus from a philosophy and game design perspective. According to Hoshino, he had to convince the veteran staff members that a drastic change to Persona's structure and gameplay loop was needed to appeal to a broader audience. The calendar, time management, and social link systems that the game introduced to the genre are to this day considered core mechanics in what is now known as modern Persona. One of my personal favorite videos on YouTube is How Persona 3 Changed the Series Forever by Bubble Tea. That video explains just how foundational Persona 3 has been, far better than I could hear. No matter what your opinion of P3 is, it's undeniable that it laid the groundwork for modern Persona to become as successful as it is today. Using the same engine and assets, the core group of Hoshino, Meguro, and Soejima wasted no time creating Persona 4, which would release to even more popularity 2 years later. This cemented Persona as Atlus's premier series, and after the Sega acquisition in 2013, the company has never looked back financially. By this point in time, modern Persona has already taken over Atlus's library. Including spin-offs and re-releases, they put out 9 Persona 3 and 4 related games within a 9-year span. If that wasn't enough, the modern Persona trio ran it back yet again for the most highly regarded and financially successful game in the history of the company, Persona 5. And I'm sure most of those who clicked on this video don't need me to tell you how many modern Persona spin-offs the success of that game facilitated. More importantly, the issue this caused was Atlus's overcommitment to the Hoshino-era Persona games, to the point where their smaller franchises were completely alienated. Shin Megami Tensei 4 was enough of a success that the mainline series was still alive, despite a 5-year gap between 4 Apocalypse and SMT5. However, the risky, unique, and beloved sister franchises to Persona are the ones that truly suffered from the oversaturation. Devil Survivor 2 released in 2011, years before the Sega acquisition. At the time, fans were not aware that it would be over 11 years until a non-mainline or Persona MegaTen game would release. And guess what? When it finally happened, it wasn't even good. So why am I saying all of this? Well, if it wasn't evident, Atlus is my favorite video game developer. And despite the fact that I enjoy Persona about as much as I enjoy the broader series, even the most loyal of fans cannot deny that Atlus has gotten too comfortable over the last decade. I do think that the company is subject to a lot of excessive criticism, and their games are nitpicked to hell a lot of the time, but if there's one complaint about them that I always find myself agreeing with, it's A, the DLC practices, which to me is more of an industry issue than it is an Atlus issue, and B, and the topic of this video, that Atlus's recent catalog doesn't really display the innovation and variety they once did 20 to 10 years ago. It's no secret that the company is almost in the opposite financial situation they were in when Persona 3 released. Mainline SMT is selling about 1 million copies per entry, and a relatively lower budget remake of Persona 3 is selling 1 million copies in 5 days. With all of that, Atlus is looking for a third series to establish itself as a pillar for the company. The first attempt at this was rebooting the Soul Hackers IP, which in itself is a branch of the Megami Tensei side series Devil Summoner. Needless to say, that didn't work out for them financially. However, I don't think that they anticipated that to be the third pillar, knowing what was coming in the future. Hoshino, the director of modern Persona, left the series in 2016 to create his own studio internally within Atlus. The formation of the studio solidified the position that Atlus is in today. The big three I've been referencing all turned their main efforts towards the studio, and as far as we know, the only member who is still deeply involved in the Persona series is Soejima. After 3 mainline entries for games that collectively total in at least 260 hours, the people responsible for making Persona what it is today are leaving the series in the hands of younger staff members, just as Koji Okada and Kazuma Kaneko did with them after Persona 2 Eternal Punishment in the early 2000s. Studio Zero teased the existence of a new fantasy RPG in 2017. At the time, there was almost nothing to go off of. Teaser trailers that were clearly not indicative of the game, as well as very early concept art and some music found in Catherine Fullbody. And yes, that as well as Catherine Classic are also Hoshino Meguro Soejima products, for those unaware. Fantasy games have never been a massive part of Atlus's operation. Have they made mediocre to great fantasy games before? Sure. Stella Deus and Etrian Odyssey come to mind as critically successful titles, but both aren't exactly cash cows. Most notably, neither of these games involved Hoshino. Fans couldn't wait to see what he and the other core Persona creators would do with a setting unfamiliar to them. And wait, they did. For 6 years, there was a complete radio silence on the game. Aside from interviews with Hoshino confirming its existence, there was no actual content related to the game released from 2017 up until the 2023 Xbox Game Show, where Metaphor-ReFantazio was finally unveiled to the world. 99% of those watching had no idea what the hell they were looking at, including Atlus fans. But the 5 people who actually knew what Project ReFantasy was absolutely lost it.
Oh my god, it's ReFantasy!
Over a year has passed, and here we are now, on the heels of 2 massive releases for Atlus. Metaphor is releasing a few days after this video is uploaded. For me, this feels like this is the most consequential Atlus title since Persona 3. I feel like they need to have more confidence in themselves and their rich history of intellectual property. This is the same company that made Devil Survivor, Digital Devil Saga, the Raito games, Catherine, and Trauma Center. These series don't necessarily need to come back, even though that would be great. What needs to happen is a return to experimenting, because that's what they were doing in their golden era. This is where Metaphor comes in. This is a risk for a company that's been playing it safe for a decade. Full disclosure, I've finished the demo and thought that the 6 hours I played were fantastic, but as Atlus knows all too well, a great game is not necessarily a financial success, and I'm personally pessimistic about how well this game will sell. For one, Metaphor-ReFantazio has always been a tough sell for me as the name of this game. It's not that I dislike the name itself, but what sounds better in a conversation? You should check out Persona 4, or you should check out Metaphor-ReFantazio. Secondly, non-MegaTen Atlus titles have a spotty history in terms of performance. Stuff like Catherine did pretty well, but duds like Stella Deus and Trauma Team are examples of poor sales when Atlus isn't using the Persona or SMT marketing crutch. Yes, now that Persona 5 is a massive thing, it's possible that some people will flock to the creator's newest title. But for as successful as Hoshino is, he doesn't quite have the fan draw that a Yoko Taro or Kojima has. Of course, reasons exist that suggest the game will do alright for itself. A Game Awards nomination or win would go a long way recognition-wise. But I'm definitely not the only person saying that this game is underhyped coming into release week. Either way, the result will most likely affect how Atlus will tackle future projects. Similar to the power Persona 3 had on future Atlus games after it was released 18 years ago, if the game fails, we might have to get accustomed to Atlus staying in the state it's in right now. Studio Zero probably has enough pull in the company to do whatever they want for the next game, unless Metaphor completely bombs, which I don't think it will. However, for the other 2 dev divisions within Atlus, P Studio and Team Maniacs, there might be more directives for stuff like sticking to the well-known modern Persona formula or just not making new IPs in general. I don't think that Studio Zero should be the only team allowed to do such a thing. But if the company's most proven people can't make a hit game outside of Persona or SMT, then in all likelihood it'll stay that way. On the flip side of the negative projection I have for this game, this is a massive opportunity for the company. New IPs in general have been harder to come by in the last few console generations, so if this is successful, it bodes well for future projects. I obviously don't know the budget for this game, but if it sells better than the $1 million that vanilla SMT5 accomplished, that would be seen as a great success for a brand new IP. Time will tell if Metaphor becomes Atlus's third pillar. As for right now, I'm pretty happy with the state of the game after playing it for a few hours. Some people will probably suggest to me that Metaphor is just medieval Persona, which is fine if you're being general, but I do think that that's selling the game quite a bit short. I think it's more accurate to say that it's a culmination of everything Hoshino has worked on previously. The battle system and challenge the game presents on hard mode is definitely not reminiscent of modern Persona, aside from the button prompt menu, which is literally so good that every turn-based game should have it. Obviously, the press turns from SMT are here, so is the front and back row system from Devil Summoner, and don't forget the synthesis attacks and archetype skill tree from Digital Devil Saga. If you want to complain about this game not really innovating too much, then that's perfectly reasonable. Calling it Persona 6 is a bit disingenuous to me, especially considering that I played a prologue demo that had much better pacing than pretty much every Persona prologue. The subject matter also has some similarities, but is largely tackling entirely different themes and ideas when compared to any Persona or SMT title. To wrap things up, I'm just happy that we're finally here. Nearly 8 years in the making, and Project ReFantazio is finally in our hands. I'll definitely be covering it on the channel, as I want to support this game as much as I can. If this game does well, we could realistically expect Atlus to do stuff like this more often. That would be a far cry from 2020, when some justly thought that the Megami Tensei series was dead, and that Atlus would become a new Persona game-making machine. Either way, let me know how you're feeling about Metaphor. What were your thoughts on the demo, and do you think I'm exaggerating when I say that this is a massive crossroads for Atlus? Let me know in the comments, and leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Until next time.